and welcome to the Giving Voice to Depression podcast, produced in partnership with the A.B. Corcor Foundation for Mental Health. I'm Terry, the creator and co-host of this podcast. I've lived with depression most of my life, and I know how easy it can be to feel all alone in the experience. I'm not alone, and you aren't either.
And I'm Dr. Anita Sands, a licensed clinical psychologist with a number of my own diagnoses, all of which bring a certain amount of anxiety and depression along with them. There is great power in shared experiences. We share our own as we engage in intimate and candid conversations with our weekly guests, exploring different perspectives on and experiences with depression.
We keep it real because depression is real. We keep it hopeful because there truly is hope in spite of what depression tells you. Hello, Anita.
Hi, Terry. This is the third of our month-long series on the stigma of mental illness. In episode 263, we confirmed that stigma, a form of judgment and discrimination, does in fact exist, and that research finds that it's most effectively fought as a social justice issue versus a public health issue. Mm-hmm. Last week, in episode 264, we heard from former podcast guests and social media followers with firsthand accounts of how stigma has a powerful negative impact on them and others living with mental health conditions. So today, we're going to talk about how lessening stigma benefits not just those of us living with depression and other diagnoses, but society as a whole.
A Mayo Clinic article on overcoming the stigma of mental illness defines stigma as when someone views you in a negative way because you have a distinguishing characteristic or personal trait that's thought to be, or actually is, a disadvantage. It goes on to say that stigma can lead to discrimination. Discrimination may be obvious and direct, such as someone making a negative remark about your mental illness or your treatment. Or it can be unintentional or subtle, such as someone avoiding you because the person assumes you could be unstable, violent, or dangerous due to your mental illness. You may even judge yourself.
And one of the simplest ways to summarize the reality we're exploring in this series is that depression is not a choice, but ignorance and discrimination are. Our hope in bringing you comments and perspectives today from some of our past guests is that you'll share this episode with people who still, unfortunately and ignorantly, continue to talk about depression like it's a weakness or a personal failure.
The impact of stigma goes far beyond being misunderstood. It creates an environment where instead of feeling safe enough to raise a hand or a white flag to say, I'm really struggling, I can hardly get out of bed, I'm angry all the time without even knowing why, or I don't even know what's going on. But in addition to symptoms I'd pretty much written off as just being me, I'm having dark, hopeless thoughts that are really scaring me. People of all ages stay silent because they worry about being burdensome, being judged, stereotyped, feared, fired, or any number of other negative and offensive things.
And obviously, this is a recipe for isolation for a documented average of 10 years passing between having symptoms and getting the correct diagnosis and treatment for mental illness. And of course, it's also a recipe for increasing the risk of suicide. Ask a person who lives with mental illness how those factors, which we're collectively calling stigma, impact their perceptions and willingness to ask for help. Here are some of the answers that we got when we asked that question.
Despite my mom being a therapist, it took until me being in a pretty suicidal place before my family was like, oh, hey, maybe like you should go to therapy and maybe we should address this.
So I think if in that first month or so, I would have gotten the information and sort of kind of the permission to go get the correct help, I have a feeling I wouldn't have sunk so deep into this.
It's hard to ask for a recommendation for a therapist or a recommendation for a psychiatrist, but why? When we need a dentist, we ask our colleague or we ask our neighbor.
When it comes to seeking help, I suddenly feel weak or that I can't handle my illness.
Because you think other people see it that way.
Exactly.
Maybe my youngest does, since she has not gotten help for it. I mean, for her, I think it's always been about shame and appearing that she is not together. She wants to keep her appearances up that she's okay.
I would like to be a part of a movement to make it not that way, because I look at the statistics of especially a lot of young people who take their own life, who didn't seek any sort of help. And I think that those type of terrible events could have been avoided if we just lived in a society where talking about mental illness was on par in the same tone with talking about a physical illness.
And that movement is underway. It's clear that for many reasons, including the pandemic, which made clear to many just how fine that line is between mentally healthy and mentally unwell, and how much more open and comfortable younger generations are discussing mental health. Still, there's a lot more work that needs to be done.
The Mayo Clinic article that we mentioned in the open mentions an extremely important point that we want to emphasize, and that's others' judgments almost always stem from a lack of understanding rather than information based on facts. Learning to accept your condition and recognize what you need to do to treat it, seeking support, and helping educate others can make a big difference.
And when we say educate others, it's not like, hey, sit down, here's a class, because, the research has proven that saying this is an illness and not a weakness or a failing on a personal level is not the most effective. It's being there and saying, I'm a good person. I was going to say successful, but that's such a wishy-washy word when that can mean so many different things. But, I get stuff done. I'm a good blank. And I've got this condition. I live with depression. It's when they understand that they have a friend, a family member, a boss, a preacher, whomever, who also has this, that they start to be able to accept it and realize that it's not just bad people or stupid people or weak people. Anyway.
So that is the perfect segue to the next segment of this episode, which is discussing how the lives of those living with a mental health diagnosis would be different, better, and safer if mental illnesses were understood, discussed, and treated like the physical illnesses that they are. So again, we asked a number of our podcast guests how increased understanding and decreased judgment and fear of judgment would make a difference in their lives. Some answered more generally and others more personally. Here's a sampling.
To take the stigma away would provide so many more opportunities to ask for help.
I pull something 1 week. I know you go to the doctor, get it checked out, figure out what it is, and then take the steps to make sure it gets better. That would happen 1 week. Another week, I would have a panic attack for the first time in my life. Same thing, something unexpected happened with my health, go to the doctor, figure out what it is, and take the steps to get it. Like, if it was that simple, I think things would be so much better, so much better.
Having visibility and representation around an issue makes it more manageable.
And then see hope, see recovery, see, the person has gotten better and then they can help that person.
I think a reduction in stigma will be accompanied by increased community services. I think when the public perception of mental health is, it's a disease of the brain versus a character disorder, you're going to find people more willing to support it, just like they've come out of the woodwork to support various physical illness. You have the Alzheimer's walk, you have Parkinson's walks, you have all kinds of cancer support systems out there. And I think the money and the support system and the treatments will all gradually come to mental health.
So when we talk about how much better the world, or at least our worlds, would be if the stigma of mental illness was less, it's interesting how many people made the point that it doesn't have to be some huge effort. They weren't talking about legislation or major changes in the flawed medical model. They were just talking about being able to safely talk, and how simply starting the dialogue and being honest with themselves and other people that they could trust could make a noticeable and impactful difference.
I think that most people, when they hear what other people are going through, can find some peace
just starting to talk about it. As we talk more, so we build understanding. As we build understanding, so we can begin to think about, what are some of the things we need to put in place to truly break the stigma.
We take it out of the dark. It's dark enough. We can bring it out into the light. And I think probably one of the biggest gifts is that people who will hear this will understand that they are not alone.
Our nature is to kind of draw together and draw into community. So if you hear a story that's similar, the instinct is sort of to point at that and say, oh, hey, I'm not alone in this situation.
It inspires them. It shows them that, they may be in the midst of a horrible struggle, but that there's light at the end of the tunnel. And when you're in that struggle, you can't tell that there's a light, So these people are being that light for you.
All that hope, connection, inspiration, and information comes from sharing when it feels safe. That's a huge, effective, proven method of stigma reduction. And if you're the person hearing about someone's experience, try to resist the urge or the instinct to give advice or to tell us that we have such a nice life we shouldn't be depressed. Trust me, most of us are telling ourselves that enough. Remember, it's not a choice. We are not consciously focusing on the negatives in life and ignoring our blessings. We can't access the joy. One of depression's symptoms is not taking pleasure in or from things that typically feed us. So sit with us, listen to us, support us. You can even say, I don't understand any of this, but I love you and I'm here for you. Just don't judge, or we'll stop talking, and then we're alone again.
That's absolutely beautiful, Terry. I would just like to add that all of these things that we've been talking about, the ignorance, being uninformed about mental illness, or just not caring about mental health issues, these are all explanations for why people with mental illness do feel stigmatized. But none of these things are actually excuses. Ignorance or a refusal to take advantage of the information that's available to educate yourself, or just a lack of compassion towards others, are not excuses for not believing people when they say that they're struggling, for treating them with disdain or discriminating against them, or for making it harder for someone to manage or recover from something. So look, we have all the data and the research and all of the information gathered over hundreds of years by thousands of people to help people understand that mental illness is real illness. It's not a choice. It's not a character flaw. And it's not a sign of personal failure. So this is not up for debate. These are the facts. So yes, I think a call for more education and real understanding is important. It's critically important because lives are literally at stake. But I think what we are really making here is a call for humanity, for people to get that if someone that they know is suffering in their family, their friend group, workplace, community, virtual spaces, the response should not be to judge, ridicule, discriminate, or walk away. It should be to make the choice to care, to treat that person the way that you would want to be treated if you were the one suffering. People with mental illness are already stepping up to the best of their ability. They need the people around them to be willing to do the same. So I think, Terry, we are saying the same thing about what would help to end stigma. Be there without judging, reach out with compassion, and take on the important challenge of learning how to be helpful to someone who is struggling. So I believe we can all do this, and there are no good excuses not to.
Wow. I could not agree more. I think that was beautifully put. And when you say learn how to support somebody who's struggling, you don't have to take a class. You don't have to go online and even search, how do I support someone who's struggling? That someone knows what works for them. And you say, yes, hey, Terry, hey, Anita, hey, whomever, when you're like that, when you're in your room, when you're angry, when you're, whatever your symptoms are, when you're really anxious, what would help? How could I help? I know that it really bothers you when I say snap out of it, or, whatever is really unhelpful. And that would be a whole episode. But what would help? And it might be leave me the hell alone. Sometimes that's what we want, but it might also be give me my space, but let me know that you're there. And that if I change my mind, even for 5 minutes, maybe when you bring me that glass of water, we could just sit together while I drink some of it or whatever. Just be there. Just let me know that just because I have this doesn't mean that I'm less, that I'm worth less to you. Because that like just adds such a layer of pain on top of what's already, it's really, I mean, I'm not in it right now and it's almost hard to access how bad it was when it was so bad.
Yeah.
It was so bad.
Yeah.
It was so bad. I mean, you know, I really, everybody we talk with, like, you really believe you have lost your worth as a human being. Mm-hmm. And then if other people treat you that way, how are you ever supposed to have the hope to climb out?
Right. Right. So you're absolutely right, Terry. The response is so simple. It's to be there, to listen, to hear what the person's saying, and then follow their lead. You don't have to fix them. And you're absolutely right. Just being there without judgment and being there with that sense of compassion that we all can access means you're not alone. You're not going through this alone. That's so important.
You're going to hear some rustling because I'm going to pull out from the first episode that we did in this series.
That will tie this together.
Yeah. Okay. So going back to the first episode in this series, number, I think it was 263, Dr. Corrigan said, I accept you. I respect you. I am with you as you are.
That's pretty perfect.
So that's how we'll end. Try saying that instead of, what do you have to be sad about?
We truly hope that our podcast brings a little more understanding, helps you better articulate and reflect on your own experience with depression, or better understand how to support someone else who is struggling.
If this episode has been of comfort or value to you, know that there are hundreds of others like it in our archive, which you can easily find at our website, givingvoicetodepression.com. And remember, if you're struggling, speak up, even if it's hard. If someone else is struggling, take the time to listen.